Hi, guys. I'm glad everybody's semi-awake and excited for the day because we're going to talk about what some would believe to be one of the most challenging areas to talk about with entrepreneurship, incubation, acceleration, metrics. Now, the goal of today is really to go through different ways of looking and being able to tell the story of why you exist, how you offer value, and we're going to do it across multiple dimensions. And I'm really excited to have wonderful partners on this session. Fledge, Spring, we're going to have the Difference Incubator and Galley come up to do a big Q&A at the end. So I'm going to introduce the topic over the next few slides. We really care about you making sure, number one, you understand ways to look at data collection that are possible. I'm going to spend a couple minutes going through definitions of some of these things, which, yes, will be boring, but it'll help you contextually when you're working with your teams. We have a lot of data on these slides, so you can take this home and go through it on your own time. But we really want to make sure your data is good so that when people question your ROI, your values, exactly what you do, so you can position yourself properly in the market with investors, with stakeholders, funders, etc. You have your data, and you choose what to use to tell your story. And then measuring the ROI. At the end of the day, show that you should exist by offering value. So why do metrics matter? It really depends on who you ask. Stakeholders may care about very different metrics than the ones your team and your entrepreneurs care about. It's quality over quantity sometimes. So it's really, really important when you go into any of these things, even if your funders are asking for very specific things, hold yourself and your team to a higher standard so you're actually able to see what progress you're making, your impact across the various levels we'll talk about in a minute, and make sure you understand how to evaluate which of your mentors, which of your team members are actually adding value to different parts of your program. We'll talk about that in a minute. So there are two types of data, qualitative and quantitative data. Quantitative data is stuff that's done in numerical form. Qualitative is written. And I did a very long dissertation, and I did qualitative and quantitative data. So if any of you are looking at building out qualitative storytelling data, there's ways to group it properly, and I can very happily, I love talking about how to group qualitative data. So feel free to pull me aside. But this is really where it all starts. What can you actually measure to be able to make sure that what you're doing matters, has impact, and shows the value of an entrepreneur taking time out of his life, a funder saying this was a good investment for us, etc. So, definitions. Quality assurance is what you do before you start collecting the data. How are you training the people who are collecting data? How are you making sure that your survey instruments, how your data collection methodology is set up, is as easy as possible for people to be able to use on a daily basis, use on a weekly basis, make sure everybody understands the importance of how the data is helping you be a better program for them, for you, for the ecosystem, etc. A lot of that is preparation when people come into your program, even before they apply, making sure they understand that you are data-driven and they need to be data-driven. Does anybody want to work with non-data-driven entrepreneurs? That's a nightmare. People who lead with their gut and don't think about numbers, good luck. Quality control. During and after the data collection, how are you making sure that you really captured what you wanted? Inter-rater reliability is one of my biggest pet peeves because a lot of times people are only working off of self-report data. So I give you a survey of how you feel about my program. Because of your past experience, you may not really have a full understanding of what you came in with versus what you leave with. And it's really, really key as people go through programs. If there isn't good training in place, a lot of self-report data is complete garbage. So it's very, very important to think through not only the inter-rater reliability, which means if there is an assessment tool, every single time people do the same assessment, or different people do similar assessments, you're actually getting what you need from the tool. Your data can work for you. Reliability means the test results are consistent across multiple test taking times, across multiple types of people taking it. It's clear. Validity is if it measures what it's supposed to measure. And this is the key point of all of this. A measurement may be reliable but not valid, and valid but not reliable. So, triangulation. This is one of my favorite topics. This is how you test to see that the data actually has other verified means of making sure what was reported actually happened. So, it's the cross verification. And sometimes you'll have self-report data from an entrepreneur. You'll be able to have a mentor be able to follow up on some things. We actually pull data directly from QuickBooks or Google Analytics or whatever else from our entrepreneurs because I like triangulation. So there's lots of ways you can make sure that you have really, really good data, not just from self-report. Especially when you start thinking about entrepreneurs sometimes thinking that their data reporting is marketing for them, and it's not always as factual as one would like. Why do we care about triangulation? It minimizes bias. There's 4 main types of bias. I'm just going to talk about it really quickly. 3, sorry. Measurement bias. So if there are challenges in how the things are being measured in the first place, triangulation means you have different perspectives and different data points to pull from. The sampling bias, again, is sometimes a challenge. If you care about good data, just make sure somebody from your team reads through this. Okay, this is the meat of what I care about making sure you understand today. 6 different levels, dimensions of data collection. A lot of groups only focus on how much was raised and job creation and revenue growth. We go very, very deep into data collection because we're in education. We care about education and understanding what works and doesn't work across different groups, across different accelerators, incubators, etc. And because we run our own programs, but then we provide the back end and resources and software for lots of other organizations, understanding how different types of groups are doing different types of things across different countries changes the way we're able to then better create content, curriculum, support, even training mentors. So, 6 levels. At the individual level, what we end up doing is we take a baseline at the application point, and then we provide content during the application time, because then we can actually see who's willing to do the work. Why? Because obviously, there are a lot of people who may not have any business background and won't be able to talk about their customer lifetime value or make financial projections or even be able to do market research properly. So by doing a baseline at the beginning to understand their own strengths and weaknesses and see how honest people are, and then offering content during the application period, I get to see who's willing to do the work. I don't want to work with lazy people. I don't care how smart you are if you're not going to do the work. So, skill sets, growth as a leader, we look at personality dimensions, and my real focus is on longitudinal individual growth. Again, yes, we follow company growth, but if you track that person longitudinally and keep giving them access to content and development, even if the company doesn't work, the next company is freaking awesome. You see the growth. Yes, sir. Oh, thank you. Longitudinal means over a long period of time. So a lot of problems arise in many studies where they look at very short time frames, and unfortunately there's also a major challenge in having, when an accelerator program is over, a lot of people stop giving you data. And so we have built in a lot of extremely annoying reminders and value to making sure that they give us data over long periods of time. It's very valuable to us, but more importantly, it gives them a sense of how they can continue to get value from the network. Does this all make sense? Individual level? So there could be 2, 3, 5 people on a team. How are you properly giving each of them value, whether or not their company works? How do you give them education, tools, resources, different mindset, global opportunities, thinking through how to change the way they solve problems for society, the world, etc. Okay? Company and products. So now we're looking at the actual, and this is going to be qualitative and quantitative, but you want to try to get as many quantitative data sets as you can from each company. That means before you start a program, you hammer it into their heads, this is a program focused on making you a data-driven company. So, participant company metrics, this is really setting them up for proper investor reporting at some point. Many groups don't train companies as to what investors are looking for from day one, especially global investors, and making sure that they have everything from the beginning to understand you have to have this type of performance. It's very easy to say, here are my projections, and then nobody actually compares them to the actuals. There will obviously be a reset as the program goes through, understanding where your projections were and how quickly you thought things would happen and the actuals. But once they get into that and can be honest with themselves, they're better entrepreneurs. They're humble, they understand that it's a long road, and it really, really shows their ability to be much more open. Now, a lot of the companies we end up working with, we work with idea stage, but the vast majority are already $1 million to 10 million in revenue. And I love that group because they're ready to do global scale. Most of them don't yet have the deep understanding of why they need to be data-driven companies, so they're still like acting like hustlers. But if you start giving the systems and process mindset and the data-driven mindset at the idea stage, it completely transforms the way they build their businesses. And it makes them more likely for success, period, because they're focused on customer data, market validation, etc. So obviously revenue, job creation, margins per revenue stream, we have them parse out per geography, per revenue stream, per separate project. We have them do A/B testing on every single piece of what they're doing. Okay, and I think one of the key things we really do is focus on making sure before a mentoring session happens, before anything happens, mentors, we see their data. They have to update their data weekly or monthly. After programs, it's monthly. And after we've trained them and they do it automatically, then we can pull it directly through APIs from whatever platform they're using. Because we want that data longitudinally. I don't care about just 3 months. You have to build a real company. Okay, so this was venture metrics. So these would be like company level metrics. And then for each separate product or geography, these would be like product metrics that then roll into company metrics. And they have to be accountable. Like there's no hiding when there's data. Sorry. All time stamped, no hiding. Reality check. No like talking through mentoring sessions and feeling good about it because nobody asked you the tough question. Okay, program metrics. So this is, you may run an organization that runs several programs. So across each program, you're going to have very specific metrics you want to track too, right? Application acceptance rates, average revenue growth during program and post 3, 6, 9, 12, 3 years. Mentor satisfaction scores is a really key one for us. At the end of each mentor session, mentors and the teams automatically get sent a reminder to give us mentor feedback, because I may be early stage and Luni might be focused on late stage, and we may just not click because he's not patient enough because I'm too early, right? He's a fantastic mentor for a different type of startup, right? So we want to be data-driven in how we do that piece of mentor matching. And I should say, like, my dissertation was on mentoring. I love mentoring. Mentoring is a long-term relationship of a person committed to your personal growth. It's not somebody who sits with you for an hour and tells you what you should be doing with your company and doesn't listen. So this is a really key feature here. We really care about the mentor development process and making sure that, yes, there has to be a chemistry piece, but mentors need to be professional, and we track everything. And then we can see that if 20% of the companies that this mentor met with end up having higher growth because of these things, we sometimes can track that back to an individual. We make specialized content with them, etc. Mentor says, okay, diversity and inclusion metrics, value per employee, role created, mentor hours. Mentor hours is really interesting because, like, if I charge $200 an hour for my consulting time, and then I give you 3 hours over the course of the next 2 months of my time, having that startup understand the value of mentoring that was shared with them really helps them realize how freaking lucky they are to be in our program. Sometimes entrepreneurs need to take a step back and stop asking for stuff and realize that being part of these programs sometimes is the game changer they need. So we remind them with value numbers as much as possible. Investment totals, obviously from different types of groups, applicant data accepted versus applicants, and that's one of the other nice things we do. Since we run virtual and hybrid programs, we sometimes provide content and support without a formal program or mentoring to applicants, so we can actually track, and all we ask in return is their data. So we can actually track what happens because of mentoring and without the mentoring. Organization. So my organization that runs several programs, what am I tracking? Burn and run rate for my organization. Application growth, company performance growth. So my company, my organization, where I have to treat myself as harshly as I treat my startups. My team needs to be data-driven and accountable. I have to show ROI for every expenditure. They have to show why they need to continue with my company. And I mean that in a nice way. Carlos, I'm not mean, right? We're like really fun and okay. But in a nice way, people need to understand we're not there to just give things away. We're there to help people, and they need to work just as hard as we do. Staff turnover, mentor applications, turnover, value creation, brand equity. This is a really, really key one. We spend a lot of time with our startups on brand equity, which is tied to Net Promoter Score and other things. Mentions in news, etc., from a regional ecosystem piece that is really, really key for many of the smaller programs. When they're starting ecosystems, when they're starting from scratch, we built the Arab Academies Accelerator program for Egypt last summer, and it launched at the end of last year. And the brand equity piece has been key in making sure that they get continued support and extra funding and extra programs and extra relationships, because we focus so much on telling the story, having data, making sure that the president, all the faculty, everyone understands and is part of telling the success story of a 7-location incubator and accelerator program in Egypt. Revenue, margins, investment total, core versus supplemental revenue is a really big issue for me. I call that distraction ratios. Sometimes you started a program to do specific things, and then you needed money, so you started doing other things, and then all of a sudden half your staff and everybody else is involved in other stuff that's not core to your mission. Track that. Have your people track how much time that consulting agreement that was supposed to be 40 hours and you were supposed to make 90% margins ended up being 600 hours and you made, $4 an hour because you ended up not tracking things properly. Everybody has to understand the use of their time so that we can cost things properly and we can decide what makes sense or doesn't make sense. And sometimes those distractions get in the way of serving your core mission, of helping your entrepreneurs, of making them accountable, responsible job creators and value creators for society. Oh, this is kind of a portfolio management thing that we have that tracks as people apply to different types of programs, that pipeline measurement, and then the level of programs that we work with. This is just the demo site, so it doesn't have actual data. But this would be like idea stage companies. That would be like 0 to $1 million in revenue. Validator companies that are getting ready, that are at the 1 to 10 million, really assessing if they can validate being scalable businesses. And then expand would be companies that are at the 10 million plus that are looking to internationalize. Industry. So how do we make sure that our companies are affecting industry? Some companies are there to disrupt current industry standards, right? We spend a lot of time on corporate engagement. We've worked with companies ranging from Walmart to Visa, very, very Microsoft. And so helping them change the way they look at procurement, helping them understand the diligence policies. We actually built the diligence policies and process for Walmart to be able to work with different types of startups easier without 90-day revenue, etc. Strategic partnership, corporate venture investment, brand equity in the industry, what kind of press they're getting, what conferences they speak at, what kinds of awards they're getting. That's been really important, especially in communities where there may be a lot of companies that could be good B2B companies, but the corporates there aren't ready to pull them in. Spending the time to make sure that those companies create a different type of brand for themselves, for the industry, so they get access to corporate opportunities. You have to work with both if it's the ecosystem building side of things. Developer community growth, API usage. We spend a lot of time with some of our corporates making sure that startups can work more easily and diligently and be able to pull that data. And then society, kind of your impact type metrics, right? This is your macro level impact. So role modeling for region diverse populations. That's been a really key one. Sometimes having that female entrepreneur who does XYZ. So sometimes metrics for how does that person tell the story of opportunity is a really, really interesting piece. And you can capture it. It depends, again, how you're tracking things, but it can be captured. We've been able to do it with a couple of our companies in Miami for like local ecosystem. Geographic access, new sector developed in a region. If you're bringing in companies or creating a new industry cluster in a region for economic development for a geography, you can track that really easily, because as a company starts growing and then their people leave, you all of a sudden have a whole bunch of mini businesses that start. And so this is a 10-year type of data set, but it can be tracked, and it can, a lot of times you'll find that all stems from one company. Resource access, efficiencies created, cost saved, lives saved, all the nice things like water, energy, etc. Well, if you don't track anything but entrepreneur data so that they become data-driven companies, that doesn't cost anything. They can use HubSpot for startups. They can use an Excel sheet and track the Google Analytics is free. If a company is not going to track basic metrics of building their company, to me, they should not be a company. I'm very harsh. I warned you. But at the end of the day, if you don't care about numbers to show why you should exist, maybe you shouldn't exist. That's the difference between businesses that have opportunity and businesses that are like, oh, and they have like receipts on the floor and paper. If this is a lot, I know that. I'm giving you a full spectrum of all the things you should be thinking about. If you're only going to do one of these dimensions, train your entrepreneurs to understand their data. The number 2 one would be for your organization to track data at this level about your organization. And if your people aren't able to track data about this, they probably shouldn't be working with entrepreneurs. Sorry. Why do we track all this data? Because I want to make sure that my program has maximum impact, and I want to make sure that we add value, because otherwise, why am I pretending that I'm recruiting companies and not giving them value? So I care about all this data. Why you should is, how are you going to get stakeholders to invest? How are you going to position your program in an ecosystem? How are you going to make sure that there's ROI and you can look entrepreneurs in the face and say, you should come to me because this is what I'm going to deliver you? It holds your team accountable, it holds your program accountable, it holds you accountable to an ecosystem. And how you use the data is to get support, is to help investors understand that you're serious and you can actually provide a value to any investment they make into your program, into your fund, into whatever else. Think about what may add value to your program. And if it's only, if you leave this week with 4 or 5 really good metrics that you want all of your entrepreneurs to track, and 4 or 5 good metrics that your team should track, awesome. But you have to expose your teams, your companies, to this type of understanding that if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. It's that simple. And if you want to be great, you have to manage what you're doing. Otherwise, you're running around with like a chicken with its head cut off. How scary is it to not know what's going on? Very scary.
So first of all, just to echo what Susan said, the data and measurement is so critical to understand what's going on with the organization. And of course, embedding that mindset in your entrepreneurs is a key part of making sure that they, get into that cycle. And as a reformed banker myself, I'm a complete data and number nerd and all about the metrics because it's what kind of provides that sort of guidance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about impact from measurement from an organizational standpoint. So basically, Spring is a Vancouver-based certified B Corp, and we exist to change the world through entrepreneurship. Through our roundtables, incubation, accelerator, access to mentors, investors, partners, etc., we are empowering purpose-driven leaders with the tools needed to build a better business. We are in North America, a little bit in Central Latin America, a little bit in Africa, Europe, and Southeast Asia. So I put this slide because this kind of shows our journey as an organization and putting it in the context of how that has affected the way that we measure our own impact as well. So we started out with pure sort of incubation programs and then added on more of a accelerator ones to have shifted into roundtables and now are doing more sort of global work as well. That journey has meant that the things that we're tracking has also had to evolve. And again, leaning in on what Susan said, having a baseline system, but also making sure that it's adaptable to change with the way our business has evolved is a key part of being agile. Because as you know, just like the startups that we support, things change for us too. So making sure that the system is simple enough, but also allows us to understand what's going on as we add on things, change things, etc., is a big part of our journey. So the way that we've thought about impact as an organization, and this was brought up, is that there's the impact that we are creating as Spring in the way that we exist and the change that we're looking to have in the world as a company. And then there's the venture impact that's created by the startups and the founders that we support and the change that they're having. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tools and the framework that we have set up as well. Okay, so very purposefully, we were set up as a for-profit entity from the beginning. And when I joined in 2016, the first thing, probably in the first week, I said to Keith, I'm like, we need to become a B Corp. Because the B Corp movement is one that is quite rigorous, but it's also a way for you as a for-profit, mission-driven organization to really put your flag down on the ground and say, these are the things that we care about. So B Corp is a movement out of the US under B Lab, which is a certification process, kind of akin to fair trade or organic certification, and it's basically a branding tool, but also a way for you to certify that you are trying to do business in a more sustainable way. The elements that it looks at are governance, employees, community, environment, and customers. The baseline score to become a B Corp is 80. When we certified in 2017, about a week before my second child was born, I might add, we scored about 94, and so the goal is to, consistently every time you recertify, continue to improve. And going through that process of becoming a B Corp really forced us to think more deliberately about the way that we ran as a business and the types of things that we wanted to put in place to make sure that we were an impactful organization in every way. There were things that we were already doing. So for instance, we already banked with a local values-based co-op, but it also made us think a little bit about what sort of supplier relationships we wanted to have, who we worked with, whether there was any exploitation along the supply chain stream, etc. It forced us to think a little bit deeper about our governance structure. And so at an organizational level, that's one key way, in addition to, of course, all the base KPIs and metrics that Susan mentioned, with respect to revenue and all that tracking. And actually putting that system in place as well has created this data-driven culture in our team, which has accelerated our growth, but also got us to a place of being a lot more financially sustainable. And then the lens that we use in addition to this is the Sustainable Development Goals. Has anybody here seen the tool developed by Tonic that maps out the Sustainable Development Goals? If you haven't, I think we can post that as a resource. But we took a leaf out of their page because what they've done is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they expand them into impact themes, and then they're able to match those impact themes with the various metrics out of IRIS. And so it's a tool that allows impact investors to figure out what impact they're having. And so we've used that as a framework as well to really understand what change the ventures that we support are having, as well as us as an organization. So our first sort of goal that we're contributing to is quality education, followed by reduced inequalities, decent work, economic growth, and gender equality. And then we do the same for the ventures that we support and mapping them out in terms of the goals that they're looking towards solving. In general, each of the companies in our roundtables right now are working towards at least one, if not more, of the Sustainable Development Goals, and that provides a nice visual framework as well that people can relate to. Okay, and so yeah, just the breadth of impact is displayed here with respect to the number of founders and companies that have gone through our programs, the companies that have been created, investment that's been raised, gender diversity across the board, workshops, etc. And so just this whole exercise, and what I can also do is share the impact report that I recently published in the end of September. It was the first time that we communicated all this information. And it was a really challenging exercise, trying to come up with an impact framework and putting out a report, etc. Getting into that mindset of building, the whole data mindset is quite a rigorous process, but one that I think has been great for us as an organization, for the community that we support, and we're no way done. Like even just looking at some of the things that Susan had on her slides, I'm like, oh, we should be doing that. We should also be doing this, because so it's a journey that I think is never ending, one that you constantly need to continually improve. But this is the lens that we use, and I think I will stop there and give it to Luni.
All right, while he's setting up the slides, my talk's going to go a slightly different direction, which is how do you then report your impact to your stakeholders? And in my case, again, I run an investment-driven system, so that's 53 investors, right? How do you report what impact this organization is doing with their money? Because they're the ones that are making this happen. All right, and quick map of Fledge. We're in 10 different cities. We haven't quite made it over to Asia yet. That's one reason why we're excited to be here. We'll skip to there. All right, we measure we provide 3 different measures of impact for the entire portfolio to the investors twice a year. First one is the Pinchot Impact Index. Has anyone ever heard of that? Yeah, one person in the room. I think I gave you the book. I'll explain what that is in a minute. Second one is Gender Lens. So we work with entrepreneurs from around the world. It's not quite 50-50 yet. Actually went down last time it got measured, but we report out to our investors companies with women, companies that are targeting women that are run by men, and then the rest. And then like spring, we do the histogram of UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have 16 out of 17 covered. We just haven't brought in a company that does education yet. Right, so let's go back to the first one, because that's the most interesting of them. So it comes out of this book. Yes, that's my name on the bottom. I read a lot of books. And this was an aha invention that I had at the end of 2014. And in order to flesh it out, the way I flesh out ideas is I write books. All right, and the problem that I was trying to solve is how do you collect together all of the various impacts that these companies have and come up with one number? This is what everyone was talking about for SOCAP the first few years I went there. Everyone in every event I went to, they were all asking, how do you get one measure of impact? And so if these are, let's say, 8 of the things 8 of your companies are working on, how do you measure each one? Like, what is the measure of impact of each of those? And so if you grab some IRIS metrics or some other metrics, you can come up with measures, but then you can't add them together. How do you add 1,000 vaccines to 1,000 meals? right? You can put the vaccines in the meals, but that doesn't tell you where the impact is, right? I always talk about this as adding a chicken to a solar panel. Now, you can do the other way around. You can put the solar panel on the back of the chicken, but adding the chicken to the solar panel doesn't tell you what you're doing, right? And the other thing that comes up here, which is the really big aha moment, which is what is more important here, which is the bigger impact. So if I'm sitting there, even if we'll talk about selection later today, if I have the choice of helping a company that's going to do 1,000 vaccines this year or serve 1,000 meals to people who are hungry, which is a more important impact? Let's try that. Show of hands, okay? Who thinks 1,000 vaccines is more important? Bigger impact? Right? And then who thinks 1,000 meals is a bigger impact? And why? You know, half the people didn't vote. So how many people think it's about the same? Well, sure. There's all sorts of different pieces, and that's kind of the key here. Is that there's no comparison between these two, right? They're both good. That's what it comes down to. They're both good, and 2,000 vaccines versus 1,000 vaccines, that's both good, right? Clearly, 2,000 is slightly better in some manner, but if we're talking about a disease that's killing 1 million people a year, the difference between 1,000 vaccines and 2,000 vaccines is nothing. And then again, how do you add these together? So this was my problem. I actually have this problem. I have 81 graduates, and they do all sorts of things. And yet I need to report out to my investors on how their money is being used. Is it efficiently being used to do good in the world? The key idea I had this one night at the school where I teach is that one solar panel is really nice, and 1,000 solar panels is about the same, but that's nothing compared to all renewable energy in an entire country. That's a huge difference between all renewable energy and 1,000 solar panels. And that's also a huge difference between one country. So Costa Rica is 100% clean energy, so is Iceland now. But there's a huge difference between that and the world, right? Everyone using all renewable energy, and that's orders of magnitude difference. Right, so orders of magnitude, if you don't know this number, someone should call out that magic word. Orders of magnitude is just tens, right? 10 times 10 is 100. Another order of magnitude is 1,000. And so if you map this out and show what this looks like, if we have that little tiny square in the corner there, an order of magnitude bigger would be the next square up. And it's actually not a whole order of magnitude. That's just factor of 5. And then the next level up is that square, and the next level up is that square. So that's 4 levels of 5. And if we get to the 10th level at this progression, that is a square that is the size of the entire Earth. 10 orders of magnitude bigger. And this is a factor of 5 instead of a factor of 10. If we did a factor of 10, we'd have a square that would cover the Earth and the Moon all in one square. Or it might go halfway to Mars. It would be really big. We're not used to dealing with those numbers. We're not used to dealing with orders of magnitude. Right? And it's called a logarithmic scale. I won't go into the math on there. The Pinchot Impact Index is not 10 orders of magnitude. It's 21 orders of magnitude. It's a big scale, right? And so we shrink this scale down to a number between 0 and 7. And every step, every time you go up one number in the Pinchot Impact Index, you go up 3 orders of magnitude. That's 1,000. And in English, we have names for all these. The first one's called 0. The next one's called 1,000. The next one's called 1,000,000, and then 1,000,000,000, and then 1,000,000,000,000, depending on which English you speak. So that happens to match up really well. And so you write the numbers just like that. P for Pinchot. I was standing next to Gifford Pinchot III at Pinchot University. He was talking about an idea he had. He was the inspiration on this, so I named it after him. All right, so what is this scale? Well, 0 is nothing. You haven't done anything in the world. A P1 is any small improvement to the world. So 1,000 solar panels, or 1 solar panel, or a chicken, or vaccine, all right, whatever is a P1. So non-systemic change is a P1. And a P2 is any small systemic change. So this is a system that allows anyone to put solar panels on their house. But it can go all the way up to there's no more homelessness in the city or the country. That is a systemic change, right? No unemployment and so forth. And you can see we're only at 2 here, right? 3 goes up even harder. So if we can solve homelessness, that's a pretty easy problem versus solving world hunger. Solving world hunger is a 3. All diseases are cured, and so forth. And it goes up pretty quickly from here. So no more poverty. Everybody gets educated. It's It's nice out there. The wildlife is getting bigger instead of smaller. We get to 5, we have peace on Earth. You can walk around anywhere you want, anywhere on the planet, you're safe. Right? But we're not done yet. We get to 6, which is what I call a good day on Star Trek. You walk up to the wall, you ask for anything you want. It's yours for free, doesn't matter. Everyone's happy. And then 7 is everyone is living like the Dalai Lama. Right? So that's 7 orders of magnitude. And you can see that's, and I do this on purpose, not just because it's funny when you get to 7, but because that's a goal, right? We should live in a world that's a P7. We should live in a world that has all its problems solved, and we're a long way away from that. And we're not just a little bit away from that. We are 21 orders of magnitude away from that, right? We have a lot of work to do. So when you do this scale, the interesting part is that everything that we're doing in the room is probably a P1. So again, I asked you which was better, the vaccines or the whatever. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. They're all good. They're all one unit of goodness, right? And if you want to do more than one unit of goodness, you have to do something systemic that can actually be implemented at least in your entire country, if not your entire region, or you need P3 to be in the entire world. I don't think anyone here is doing anything that will scale across the world yet. All right? So then you can aggregate these together. The book will tell you how to do the math. Excel will do the math for you. And so literally you can take your companies. I'll get there in a second. You can take your companies in 10 minutes. They're probably all P1s. You can add them together and you get a number. That's what you saw in the chart there. And then you can go negative as well. So -1 would be driving a Prius, right? You're still burning gas, but you're doing better. -2 would be the oil and gas industry. It's systemically bad for the planet. And it goes down to -6 is no more human life, and -7 is the end of the universe, right? Kind of a little bit stronger than enlightenment, but anyway. And then the other aha moment was that and my actual objection to the B Lab stuff, and Fledge used to be a B Corp as well, is that's really about what you intend to do. And really the aha moment was that there's a difference between what is possible with the idea that you're implementing as an entrepreneur and what you are intending to do with your company. That's 2 different levels. So I intend, let's say I have the potential to solve renewable energy across the planet, right? Maybe it's a company that's doing fusion. But the intent of this particular company is to do it in one region and sell like 1,000 units. And so that'd be good, but not as good as the entire world. And then what has that company actually achieved? And that's going to be a way smaller number. Have they achieved everything they've set out to do? They get the full number of points. And if they've achieved less than that, they get fewer number of points. And so you can put these together. And the end is you get 3 numbers. So for my portfolio of 81 companies, as of right now, we have a potential impact that is a P3, right? With a tiny little bit left over from everyone else's. But the intent of those companies combined is just a P2, so systemic change, but not global change. And they have achieved a tiny amount of impact. They haven't even achieved together one unit yet, right? So they're still under 1 unit. But it gives us a number, and it gives us a trend line that we can plot out, and we can show that to our investors that things are getting better, right? So they're all going up, and you can see little jumps, and the jumps are whenever we get some company that's doing something incredibly impactful to the world as opposed to just one more thing, right? So that's where the jumps come in. All right, and then when you're talking to entrepreneurs and you show them something like this, and I do this in my MBA class, it inspires them. Actually, usually it depresses them that they're just not doing enough, but it also inspires them to do something that's much bigger. And we need the entrepreneurs that we work with to do things that are bigger because the world has big problems to solve. And this is one tool to help show them that there are bigger aspirations out there than just putting one more solar panel on one more chicken. All right, that's it.
So as incubators and accelerators, one of the challenges that we have is as companies graduate out, 1 year down, 2 years down, that's when true impact and growth happens. And at that point, investors invest in them. And at that point, it's very difficult to access information from them, to share information. Contractual obligations really don't get, honored. So I want to hear, maybe not just from you, best practices, and just in terms of numbers, how many companies have really reported data? For how many years has that happened? Just to get a sense of, is this all really possible? To collect it beyond when they move out of the incubator.
Yeah. I'll go first on that one, because I think I have the best practice on that, which again comes down to Fledge is an investor in every one of our graduates. And as you'll see on Thursday, we do it in a form where they are required to report to us on a quarterly basis, because that's how we get a repayment. And so we hear from them on a quarterly basis. Some of them are done repaying us, but they still report to us because now we have years of experience and years of ingrained behavior of reporting to us. And so we hear from all our graduates every quarter, with a few exceptions of those that are being slow, but every single time. And in terms of like the reports I'm showing you, one reason I'm using these 3 measures is that I can produce all those measures just from their updates. I don't need them to go and fill out a half hour of metrics somewhere. Like just 2-3 minutes of metrics, I can figure out what their achievement is, and I can put in a number for that, and we're done.
If I can add, it is a challenge, to your point, particularly for, let's say, companies that are 2 or 3 sort of years beyond, have done a program in the past. What has worked for us is, of course, embedding that, okay, we need you to be understanding that data is important from the beginning, and so that's something that they're tracking anyway. And what has been useful for us is just creating sort of like not very frequent data asks, but let's say every 6 months, and that just helps keep people responsive. And the one thing about the way we operate is that people may have finished a program 2 or 3 years ago, but they're still in our community and network, and so they know that they're getting that continued value from us, and so part of that is sharing back as well. So, and maybe because we're still young and small, but it'll probably be more of a challenge as we get bigger.
What we do is we make measurement accessible to people who have a piece of paper and a pen, or just sand on the ground. So what we do is we break it down and make it really, really simple. And over time, often it might even only be verbal reporting, and then someone on our team takes over. We certainly help people from their starting point measure, say, 3 to 4 things only. So something about your customers, something about your purpose, something about your feasibility and your internal efficiency and how you create things. So we really bootstrap for those first couple of years. So we're really keen that every social enterprise is able to say something in those first 3 years, and is able to say, here's an early baseline that we have. And if they're able to develop some kind of theory of change or program logic, then we help them pick the 3 or 4 things in that system, their little ecosystem. What are the 3 or 4 points that, if your hypothesis and assumptions here, we've got to test all that, but really, really basic early stage, if this is generally true about what's happening, which 3 things do you want to measure? And then we start to talk about what kind of tool will you use that is reliable enough and valid enough that when the investor or the funder, or when you're redesigning your program to be better and better, when you ask, how do you know, how do you know, how do you know, you've still got a good solid answer. So we work right down that simple end, and hoping that around year 5 or 6, for a lot of businesses, and for a lot of businesses that probably never get there, that you can then start to graduate into something a little bit more sophisticated. So yeah, I'm right down the other end to these guys most of the time, except for about the 10 businesses that we've taken through to investment.
Other questions? Hypotheticals, challenges that you're up against?
I'm just going to add to this. So when we train incubators and accelerators, they only typically have 4 to 5 metrics per company at the company, and then maybe another 2 or 3 at the product level, that the mentor or the program manager can fill in some of the markets where they don't have smartphone type things, because we made everything mobile first. But But as far as compliance, when we run programs, we have really good compliance because the way we built the platform was focused on having that be the investor reporting so that the companies don't need to use or license another investing reporting piece. And as I said, we pull in data through APIs. When other people actually use our platform or our systems, a lot of times they don't get high compliance long term because they're not necessarily working on building the community. I think the community you're both talking, all three of you are talking about, is really the key piece. If you find ways to offer value to your entrepreneurs after the program, whether it be webinars, giving them access to come in for a workshop, having them speak to a next class, when they have that engagement and see that engagement with you, they're much more likely to want to continue to give you data. But they have to, I mean, it has to be something, there has to be something in it for them. If it means that because they continue to get data, every quarter they get access to a mentor, or they can be part of a demo day or whatever, they're much more likely to. For us, we really just tried to build in as much value to them to keep giving us the data and be able to access content, et cetera, and access our network.
A question for Susan. So you mentioned something called distraction ratio, core versus supplemental revenue. So A, do you measure it for your own company or the accelerator as well? And B, do you think it should be measured for your incubatees or investees as well?
That's a great question. So yes, we measure it and we try to make sure that we focus on the core. Because you have a great partnership with somebody, they ask you to do things that may not be part of your core mission. And now it's case by case. But that's been very important to us because if it's not tied to our mission or making us better in some way, it's a distraction. And sometimes it really pulls our resources in a way that confuses people. For companies, it's a really good question because a lot of times they start focusing on building X or Y or Z and then they start doing consulting or some dev work or customizing, over-customizing what they do for a particular client, which completely takes them off track from building the product that has the biggest opportunity for scale or for larger market use. So it's not, we talk about it in one of the earlier, I think in week 2 or 3, we talk about the importance of focus and we spend a lot of time on divergent paths, but there's only been a handful, maybe 5% of companies that have that as a real issue once they start getting validation. It's really more of an issue pre-validation, or if a lot of companies we work with, we really focus on not having them get investment because if they can get early revenue and be able to retain as much equity as possible so they can keep making the decisions for their business, that's really important to us. So sometimes those distraction measures mean that they're not wasting 6 months going around kissing people's butts. No offense to all of you investors, but I want them to focus on customer validation and making money from somebody who's actually going to use their product to make their product better versus sometimes investors kind of pull you in a different direction.
The data is the servant, always, of the bigger idea. And all of us in the room are guilty, I think, from time to time of having pet projects that we love. But is it really what the customer wants? Is it really true to our social intent and transformation? And is it efficient and effective in how we're delivering it? And I reckon all of us also in our accelerators get to that, week 3 or wherever it is, and someone is saying it's a pivot that they're going to do with their business, but really their core business is getting too hard and they want to add in another idea because they like the early stage ideation. That is a distraction. And I know you guys face it in the accelerators all the time, and we've just got to pull people back to their core business. So whether you have it in a conversation or whether you capture it objectively with data and sit down and show someone the truth, that they're spending far too much on something in their business, on something that is neither producing social change nor bringing in revenue. It's financial sustainability we're all interested in. Get that right and you're a long way forward.
Just 2 questions for the panel. First one is related to systemic change. How do you measure systemic change and the attribution strategy for companies who you've worked with early on, but then have managed to secure additional investment or have managed to secure additional support? How do you track that, and what's the attribution strategy that you can measure? The second one is what's the ideal monitoring cycle to measure impact? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 5 years?
The other big question that gets asked in the industry is what is impact? Both impact, systemic impact, any of this, it's all in the eye of the beholder. I've sat in rooms and argued with people on whether or not that is impactful or not. And despite the fact that I have a quantitative way to say that's a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or 4, when I did this in class, the students would not agree on what anything was. Right? Like what was someone was doing an app for meditation. And they're like, well, it's a P7, clearly. Timing and money. This is one of my pet peeves. So I do not measure how much money my graduates have raised in total. If there's a form to fill out, I'll guess it and I'll throw down a number, but I do not track that number in all the metrics I'm keeping from these companies, because that does not tell you anything except how much money they've raised. I've worked for companies back in the tech world that did $64 million raises that did not ever make a profit. Raising money is a marker that someone thinks there might be something there, but it's not a marker of success. So my only measure is how many of my key measure in my own organization outside the impact side, on the business side, is how many are still running, what percentage of the total is that. I want all my graduates to still be running. So I'm not thinking 5 years, 10 years, whatever. I'm thinking, is this company still going to be producing, who knows, 7 generations from now? That's the measure of impact.
I get a question for Dr. Susan related to the longitudinal tray. Was that longitudinal?
Longitudinal data, yeah.
Yes. I'm asking, so for example, there's one founder in my incubators running his startup for like 6 months, and he measured all the data. Then after that, he decided to pivot and change directions. And then all the data that he measured before was somehow invalid, right? But I still want to understand the growth of him personally.
Yes.
And how does it work?
So that means you have to collect data on him.
Yes.
Because the fact that he pivoted actually is amazing, because that means he learned new things and became data-driven and looked at the data and made a choice. So that falls on you to track his baseline of skills and understanding of things. And then every 3 months, 6 months, you can do different assessments. And sometimes those would be done both with him and with a mentor or you, reflecting on different aspects of what you see as important, how people change through being in programs. But that's a huge success story. And in a lot of places, helping the entrepreneur grow and learn new skills is the best thing for the community. Even if the business doesn't work, that person's going to add value to society. Even if they go work in a corporation, never do a startup, because of your training, that means they're more open and likely to be supportive of earlier stage companies, be able to diligence them well for opportunities, etc. So the education side of individual development is a huge impact measurement for your programs. You have to track it in order to be able to get support, be able to tell the story in a very different way of what you're doing in a community.
So is there any specific way to measure the impact of any behavioral change initiative by startups?
Yeah, you can use theory of change and program logic and the right measures and tools.
Thank you guys very much, and thank you to my wonderful partners in this session.